I've been married to Rachel for 7 years now, and to be honest, it hasn't been easy. We were never the perfect couple, not even close. From the start, there were issues, little things that gradually turned into big things. But we stuck it out, convincing ourselves that love was enough to get through the tough times. Rachel and I met through mutual friends. I was drawn to her immediately. She was beautiful, had a sharp sense of humor, and there was something about her that just clicked with me. But we were both pretty young when we got together, and looking back, I realized that neither of us was really ready for what marriage would entail. Over the years, we settled into a routine. I worked a demanding job in finance, often pulling long hours, while Rachel stayed home. She'd worked before, but when we moved to a new city for my job, she decided not to look for a new position right away. At first, it seemed like a good idea. She'd take care of the house, maybe start a small business or pick up some hobbies. But that never really happened. Instead, Rachel seemed to lose interest in everything. She stopped trying to find work or even engage in anything meaningful at home. She spent most of her time watching TV or scrolling through her phone. I tried to encourage her to get out more, to find something that made her happy, but nothing seemed to stick. It was like she was just floating through life, disconnected from everything, including me. Our relationship started to suffer. We barely talked anymore, and when we did, it was usually about mundane things like bills or groceries. The passion that was once there had faded, replaced by a sense of obligation. I'd come home exhausted, hoping for some connection, but all I got was indifference. We'd argue about small things, and the arguments would escalate into full-blown fights about nothing in particular. I guess part of me knew that something was wrong, but I was too wrapped up in my own world to do anything about it. Work was my escape, a place where I felt valued and in control, unlike at home. But the distance between us kept growing, and I started to feel like we were living separate lives under the same roof. Then, a few months ago, things took a turn for the worse. Rachel began acting differently, more distant, more secretive. She'd disappear for hours at a time without telling me where she was going. When I'd ask, she'd just shrug it off or get defensive, saying she was just out with friends or running errands. But I knew something was off. It wasn't just the disappearances. She started dressing differently, wearing outfits that she hadn't touched in years. She began spending more time on her appearance, putting on makeup and doing her hair just to go out to the store. I wanted to believe it was just her trying to feel better about herself, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. One night, after another one of her unexplained outings, I finally confronted her. I asked her straight out if there was someone else. She laughed it off, calling me paranoid, saying I was imagining things. But the way she avoided eye contact, the way her voice wavered, it didn't sit right with me. I let it go that night, but the doubt had taken root. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that something was seriously wrong. Every time she left the house, I wondered where she was really going and who she was with. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at night. The thought of her with someone else gnawed at me, and I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The more Rachel pulled away, the more obsessed I became with finding out what was really going on. I hated the feeling of suspicion, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant confirming my worst fears. One evening, after another argument about where she'd been all day, I decided to follow her. She left the house around 6 p.m., dressed up in a way that was completely out of character for a quick run to the store. I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my keys and followed her. She drove to a part of town we rarely visited, a small, quiet neighborhood with a few restaurants and bars. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she got out of the car and walked into a dimly lit bar. I felt a lump in my throat as I saw her walk in, wondering if I was really ready to see what was inside. I waited outside for a while, debating whether or not to go in. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to go home and pretend everything was fine. But I knew I couldn't do that. So I took a deep breath and walked in. The bar was dim and smoky, with a few scattered patrons nursing their drinks. I spotted Rachel almost immediately, sitting at a table in the back with a guy I didn't recognize. They were leaning in close, talking in low voices. She was laughing, looking more engaged than I'd seen her in months. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt like I was going to be sick. I wanted to storm over there to confront them both, but I forced myself to stay calm. I found a seat at the bar where I could keep an eye on them without being noticed. I ordered a drink, even though the last thing I wanted was alcohol. I watched them for what felt like hours. They were completely absorbed in each other, talking, laughing, and eventually holding hands. It was clear that this wasn't just a friendly meetup. There was something between them, something real and painful to witness. When they finally got up to leave, I followed them outside, keeping my distance. They walked to his car, and before getting in, he leaned down and kissed her. That was the moment when everything inside me broke. My wife, the woman I'd spent the last 7 years of my life with, was kissing another man. And it wasn't just a kiss of passion or lust. It was tender, like they'd done it 100 times before. I didn't know what to do. I felt frozen, like my whole world had come crashing down. I watched as they drove off, and then I just stood there, alone in the parking lot, trying to make sense of it all. How had it come to this? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I needed answers, and I needed to confront her. That night, Rachel came home late, and I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't face her, not yet. I needed time to process everything I'd seen. The next morning, over breakfast, I acted like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was boiling with anger and hurt. I knew I had to confront her, but I wanted to do it in a way that would get the truth out of her. So I waited for the right moment, planning my words carefully. I didn't want to give her a chance to lie or deflect. I needed her to admit what she'd done, to tell me the truth about this other man. I wanted to know everything, even if it meant tearing our lives apart. When the time finally came to confront Rachel, I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. I had been rehearsing what I was going to say for days, but now that the moment was here, all those plans went out the window. I just wanted the truth. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, the TV playing some mindless show in the background. I turned to her and said, "We need to talk." The look on her face told me she knew what was coming. I asked her straight out if there was someone else, if she was seeing someone behind my back. She tried to deny it at first, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I pressed her, telling her I knew she'd been lying to me, that I had followed her to the bar and seen her with him. That's when she lashed out. Instead of admitting it right away, she attacked me for following her, accusing me of being paranoid and controlling. She said I had no right to track her down like that, turning the blame on me. But after a moment, she finally confessed that she had been seeing him for a few months. She said it was because she felt I wasn't giving her enough attention, that she felt neglected and disconnected from our life together. That night, she left, and I was alone in the house that had once felt like a home. I didn't sleep at all, just sat there in the dark, trying to figure out what to do next. I felt like my life was falling apart, like I was losing everything I had ever cared about. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces. Rachel moved in with her sister, and we started talking about a separation. Our mutual friends started to take sides. Some of them blamed me for working too much, for not being there for her when she needed me. Others were just as shocked as I was, but even they started to distance themselves, not wanting to get caught in the middle of our mess. I felt abandoned, like I was being punished for something I didn't even do. I started spending my evenings alone, drowning my sorrows in drinks at the bar. The people I thought I could rely on, the ones who had been there for us during the good times, seemed to vanish. In the end, it was just me. I had to come to terms with the fact that my marriage was over, that the life I thought I had was gone. I knew I had to move on, to start over somehow, but I didn't know where to begin. Looking back, I can see all the mistakes we both made, the things we could have done differently. But it's too late for that now. All I can do is learn from it and hope that someday I'll find a way to rebuild my life, to find happiness again, even if it's not with Rachel.